Hey guys, welcome to the Beer Garden show that I kind of made up. No, I'm just kidding. Been working on this for a little while. Want you to enjoy the Beer Garden, enjoy the show, watch the cool intro Chris created, see what else comes up in here, and hopefully my co-host won't disappear on me. So, welcome to the Beer Garden. Thank you guys for joining. Hey guys, we're here. We've kind of made it. Production value has improved compared to the last one. I got my co-host David Harris with me. This is kind of a show to where we talk about beer pairings, kind of how we do that with hookah. Everybody does it with everything else, including food, cigars, etc., etc. If you live in California, there's a whole nother thing, but it's okay. Um, David Harris, he's kind of a under the radar OG guy. He's been around a long time, knows a lot about hookah. Actually got to meet him for the first time in Vegas. Uh, David, when did I hit you up about this show?
Actually, like a day and a half ago. Sounds
So
about
thank
right.
you. Thank you for joining. I appreciate it. And, we got lots of stuff to talk about everything from beer to hookah to what the hell do you have sitting behind you. There's a lot of fun stuff coming up as well. So I will go into my beer pairing first. I have a beer from Iowa called Toppling Goliath. Uh, it is a Citra Pale Ale, which means that it has lots of citrus notes in it. Um, it is a very, very good beer. It is won a few awards. You see it around in festivals. You see it around at different beer events throughout the year. It used to be extremely hard to get a hold of, and now I'm in the Midwest, so it's not anymore. I'm pairing that with a flavor from Frigate that is Moscow Doha, and it is a dry tobacco, and you mix it with their juices. This is the juice I'm mixing with today, which is blueberry haze from Feargate. Sergey from Russia was nice enough to allow me to find a way to get it. And I mixed it with some new lemon lime. And I also mixed a little bit of dirty mint in it to give it a little bit of a cooling flavor, which should match, the blueberry with the citrus notes. Now, David, tell me about kind of what you're smoking first, and then we can kind of go into setups and stuff.
All right, so I'm actually doing a mix of Trifactor Lavender Mint out of Spokane, Washington. Really good stuff, really good mint. He's actually worked on the blend a bit. Used to be a little more potent on the mint side, but that's evened out nicely. And I'm also mixing that nicely with a little bit of HQ's Headquarter Hookah Earl Grey. Still not exactly a released flavor, but it is in the works. By far, out of all the Earl Greys I've tried, I think this one might be my favorite.
Now, you're pairing that with a beer, right?
Well, of course. I'm actually doing Origins from Crooked Stave. Give you guys a little bit of a viewpoint here. Crooked Stave's out of Colorado. This is actually going to be it's considered an American wild ale, but what I like to describe it as is actually going to be more of a Brune style ale. So you're going to see more of this traditional Belgian style and German style sours coming out of it. Really good stuff, gotta say.
So after we're done here, what I'll do is I'll take a picture of my beer and I will pop it up in HU. Again, I've already done that. David, Paul is asking if we can do that as well
Of course.
for yours, so that way he can try some of the different beers and some of the different pairings. Now, I know what I do for a beer pairing, and that is to look at foods that might mix well together. I do the same thing when I'm looking at a shisha, and I've discussed this in length before. But what do you look at when you're pairing? This is the kind of non-pilot, non-super edited version of the beer garden. So I wouldn't consider talking about myself on that, but I want to ask you, what do you consider when you're pairing something?
So my flavor profiles and what I tend to go for is I like those things that are going to stick on your palate. I'm even like people who know me outside know that I work in restaurants and high end dining essentially, and a lot of what I have to pair in the day to day is wine. And a lot of things that come through is people worry about the ideas that like a red wine won't go with seafood, something along those lines. And I very much say that the end goal should be that you're not going to overwhelm the food while you're enjoying, but you're also never going to overwhelm the wine for that matter. Now with this, I went with a sour because I have very savory style blends that are coming through that have a floral note to it. And this sour actually does the same. And the finish on this is a floral note, still being sour, which lets me, when I'm in between hits, still kind of get that lingering flavor between both.
So when I chose to pair the Pseudo Sue Pale Ale, I looked at the hop notes in it. So it's a very mellow when it comes to hoppiness and pininess, as far as a pale ale or IPA could be. But their tasting notes on this is it roars with voracious aromas of grapefruit, citrus, mango, and evergreen. Now, I don't get the evergreen as much as I do everything else, but if you think about it in your mind, blueberry and grapefruit, yeah, that's OG Triforce, right? And then I added the mint in there, and then I added some lime to pick up some of the other notes, which is really, really cool. I got this Kinemod that I'm smoking out of today, and you guys have seen me post tons of pictures of it. We've been in hangs a lot, David, lately, and I always see you creating something new. So what are you smoking out of? Because I know the orange one is a little famous, and it may or may have not, that design may or may not have entered the hookah battle this year and won. So would you give me a little bit of background on that?
Yeah, sure. So the orange one was in the hookah battle. We actually don't actually have a true name for it, so we kind of just call it our OG stem, where it's actually fit and finished, designed the way we wanted it to. We actually took it to the expo to get feedback initially, kind of like the proof of concept. The green one behind me here is actually what we're working on now. It's going to be called the Flex. And basically, it's going to have its own hidden purge with the option also to have a built-in mold catcher that's also going to be hidden. We're still working on that, still coming together with that. And then the yellow one that you're going to see in the background there, that one is one that was kind of what we worked on immediately after the show. That one I'd like to go back to, but it was one of those ones where it was a failed attempt in one regard because it taught me how many things I still need to kind of work with. That being said, it is a dope looking hookah and I can't wait to go revisit it. That one is going to be called actually we're calling it the Spiral, not anything. And that's going to be a fun one.
So if you want to see David's upcoming stuff, you can always look on his Instagram, follow him on Facebook, kind of figure out when he's going to release them. These are unreleased yet, so don't go just throwing your wallet out yet and bugging David every day. I would say be patient with him in that process. We've been talking a lot about it. You may or may not see one show up sooner or later at some event you may go to. I'm really excited for you, David, and hopefully you'll be back for many more episodes of the Beer Garden.
Oh, I hope to be, and thank you for having me. Got one of my two favorite hobbies, man.
So, we got a Canadian in the chat, so I want to give him a little bit of props right now. That Molson Inc. is actually the oldest brewery in North America. It's the oldest continuous brewery in Northern America. But who drinks Canadian beer here in the U.S.? But it's okay.
I mean, it's our satellite site for Hookah University. They'll figure it out eventually.
Well, is there anything or any topic that really comes to mind when thinking craft beer and hookah to you, David?
Actually, it's one of the things I used to do most. I used to periodically, one of my old roommates, who's actually my business partner on Spire Hookahs, it's Kurt Vlahos. He's kind of under the radar as well. We used to live together, and nearly every day, essentially, I would come home, we'd crack open some beers, have a bowl ready to go, and we would basically drink and smoke all night. And we're talking not like one or two beers of different origins or things like that. We would have a fridge stocked with it at all times.
So, I kind of quit drinking for a while for personal reasons, but it's something I want to get back into. I was really heavy in the craft brewing scene. At one point in time, I think I had like 600 or 700 different beers just kind of like at my disposal. And once a month we'd get together and we would open 25 to 30 of them between a group of 10 people and just taste beers from, around the US and around the States. So, before we go too much further, and I can't get over the shapes and designs of the hookah that you have sitting behind you. And I know that Mr. Producer here, Chris Fernandez, has some videos. So I'd like to try and pull some of those videos up, talk about it, talk about some of the beer, talk about kind of the nose notes that you get out of the beer, and how are those flavors interacting with what beer while we look at the videos. So, okay. Mr. Producer, if you will.
It's going to be called Spire, and the person who...
All right, so what you see there is going to actually be one of the videos I'm very happy exists. So that's from the Hookah Battle. That's the reactionary video of essentially the judges, the sculpture, basically that we made with Hookah Chef and Stefan. I cannot pronounce your last name, so I'm sorry, Stefan. And just the fact that it was something no one had even seen before. At the expo, some people were calling it the carrot hookah because its orange is so vibrant, it reminds people of the idea of a carrot. The center is kind of the idea where 3D printing is, so people can conceptualize exactly what goes on. Same kind of for the far right. So with 3D printing is you're actually taking a plastic and turning it into its own molten and liquidized form, and you stack those layers on top of one another in a sense to where there's no air gap, there's nothing like that, and it's actually making a rigid form. The advantages to this are that I basically don't have any limitations on what I can do, but I do have the ability to kind of design over a period of time and then rapidly prototype everything. If you actually look over my shoulder in the background, those are probably a third of the hearts that we've tested. On a day-to-day note, it's one of those things where 3D printing is super fun to do. There's always a learning curve to it, and it's definitely something where if anyone wants to pick it up as a hobby or anything like that, I mean, I recommend it. It's a cool little thing to have, and 10 years from now, you'll see more 3D printers in every home than you'd probably imagine. Think we may have lost some audio there on Jeremy.
So for those that don't know, this process is called additive manufacturing. It can be plastics, it could be composites, it could be carbon fiber mixed with plastics, it could be just a ton of different things, even metal. Whereas your traditional CNC, made pipe is subtracting the material to create the shape. And Chris also has some of the prototype pictures, so I'd ask him to pull those up now so we can take a look at that and I can talk about that a little bit. And while we're, kind of talking about this, what flavor profiles are you picking up that you don't normally notice when you're doing these individually, David?
I mean, a lot of the floral flavors come out a little bit more. The lavender and Earl Grey are sticking to it nicely. But when you first take that sip of beer, it cuts into it, so you still get that balance between both.
Right.
Let's address these photos real quick. So the one, if we can pop those back up, I'm sorry, Chris. The one on the left there is actually still one of the designs that we'd like to do eventually, and it's actually a full-formed version of the OG. It was designed to be what we like to call it geometrical, in the sense of every side is a different polygon that kind of fits into this general shape. Really cool, aesthetically designed. We actually decided to shorten it down because there was a lot of issues where printing kind of has its little malfunctions, and some things that you print don't necessarily go the way you want them to. We still intend to try and release that one in the future with some updates, but we'll see how that goes. The one on the right is another picture of basically how it goes. That's actually this exact hookah being on the print bed. We're talking this print alone, just for a solid piece that we did, was a day and 9 hours. So we're looking at about 33 hours on the print bed, and a lot can go wrong during that time frame. So we're very happy that it came out okay and perfect.
Yeah, you can run out of materials. You can, have a bed meltdown to where it's not coming to temperature. There's a lot of different things that can go wrong with this process, such as, even with a CNC, you could break a bit and crash your machine and it costs you $10,000 to $15,000 to replace. But, going back to kind of the thought of this show, I look at, kind of beer in some different categories. You got pale, IPA, browns, sours. There's different types of sours. There's stouts. There's barrel-aged stouts, as you've seen on the last show if you were there. It's a very big market. And we are seeing right now in hookah, people come out with flavors like lychee with the sours. We're seeing spearmint mixed with melon. We're seeing the cigar. We're seeing peanut butter flavors. So I would ask, if you were going to pair a pale ale, say, what would you pair that with? Like citrus, mints. What would you go for when you do?
Well, I mean, that's kind of subject. I mean, it is subjective. Everyone's palate's always subjective. That's one of the things about pairings, that I might like what I'm smoking and drinking right now, but you might not necessarily agree. The best way to kind of go about it is that I like to say, with a pale ale, right? If we're looking at a filtered pale ale, you're going to get a lot more of that hop and a little bit less of that citrus flavor coming through. So for something like that, maybe go with a little bit more of a in-your-face style blend, if you will, something that has a lot of fruit forwardness, maybe a little hint of citrus coming through. If we're talking about a hazy pale ale, something that's not been filtered, you're going to pick up on those notes naturally within the beer. So I'd say going on the sweeter end, you can go ahead and do like a raspberry. You can go with the blueberry like you're doing. You can even go deeper into things like a far reach would maybe be something like a passion fruit and a watermelon blended nicely. Could really substantiate the beer while not being overwhelming to the hookah itself.
Well, I kind of seen where you went with that. 21st Amendment Brewing has a watermelon pale ale. Now, imagine sitting outside on a nice hot day, drinking an ice cold watermelon pale ale, something really chill and cool. And then you could have, maybe a watermelon mint or an orange mint sitting by the pool. Sounds like a really relaxing, nice day. And hopefully we'll get to experience some of that in Florida for those of you that are going. But it's really, really cool to me to see that, look, I can blend my own flavors in tobacco, and then I can pick up a beer that kind of matches my flavor profile to, really kick that session to the next level.
Mm-hmm.
People try and add so much stuff to their base, whether it be milk and alcohol and this or that. I am a strictly, look, I may get fancy once in a while and go with like a food coloring, or when it's really, really hot outside, maybe put some ice and an old KM base and do a traditional setup. I would never put ice in one of my German bases just for the fear of it popping and not being able to replace it, because I've had that happen before. But it's really, really cool to see that, hey, okay, what do I want to do to elevate my session? I'm not going to add milk or alcohol to the base. I'm going to drink a really good beer, or I'm going to pair it with a really nice, mellow, calming whiskey that I can sit out with some friends. Or do you see Mr. John Nador time and time again? He loves his Deo wine. Um, and even when I'm eating, sometimes I'm looking, hey, what am I smoking currently? Or I'm going to go in the kitchen and cook. I'm going to taste some different flavors. What am I going to pair with that? So pairing just doesn't have to stop at, the beer garden. It can be like different things, like what you're eating. I'm going to eat a cheesecake. So I'm going to eat like I'm going to smoke like a chocolate mint flavor, maybe add a little bit of raspberry in it so I can kind of get different sensory experiences. Now, I know when I drink a beer, I go like this first. I typically bring it up to my nose. I smell it like a fine wine. I'm bougie as fuck when it comes to beer. If I go to a party, there's a Modelo. I might have one or two, but when it comes to beer, I'm really like dialed in. Are you that dialed into it? And do you smell your beer and try and get those, nose aromas as well?
If it's a new beer, a lot of the times, yeah, I look at it like a lot of the American beer styles is that we have this craft note that comes through a lot of the times, so they give you an idea of what to expect. And I think that's the best part of actually getting the nose of the beer. A lot of times comparing it, like in the sense how wine is, you can pick up on notes like cedar, you can pick up on earthy and those characteristics. You don't get that in beer as often. You can pick up on malts, you can pick up on these other generic tones that you don't imagine being as complex as they are on the nose, but then when you actually taste it, you can see these notes kind of stimulate each other.
Yeah, most definitely. And when you're doing a beer experience, they use different hops. They use toasted malts. They're going to use smoked malts. They're going to use different sugars and different yeasts, which are going to bring those flavors forward, which is really, really interesting to me. Is there anything in the beer and pairing thing that you don't think that I've covered that are coming to mind currently?
I mean, there's also the concept of what alcohol content and like the IBUs and bitterness you're going to pick up in the beer. A lot of the times, if I'm smoking, I actually tend to gravitate away from those higher APV beers because they're going to be more of a harsh tone on the palate. You're going to pick up on the bitterness of the beer that you're not wanting. You're going to get those straight alcohol tendencies. In some regards, we have things that you look at the American beer style. We do get those beers that are going to be like a 10 or 11%, and you finish with that, and you get that malt finish on stouts, for example. But then you actually get this very, very blatant interrupting tone that comes through in the beer, and that's more or less than not going to be the alcohol coming through. So I'd say that's a really good way to do it. I mean, and with hookah in general, one of the things that you always want to kind of focus on is staying hydrated. I mean, I still have a glass of water here ready to go if I need it, but it's one of those things where the more alcohol content that you're going to be featuring in that beer, the more of a irritating session you might have, because you're going to have the effects of the beer faster. You're going to kind of interrupt the tones that you're trying to pair. And then you're also going to have these issues where later on the line, the hookah is going to hit you a bit harder. I know, Jeremy, you're a hot smoker, but like you probably understand.
I completely understand that. Last pairing I did was a Goose Island, Bourbon County, and it was 11.7%. What did I decide to pair that with? I paired it with Azure Cigar, which is also a hearty blend. But I wouldn't go and drinking a, bourbon barrel aged stout with, say, a grapefruit flavor, because they just don't. They would clash really heavy on your palate, and it would almost turn sour in your mouth.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go back to the chat for a moment. Raul said something that's wanting me to bang my head on the desk as a craft beer enthusiast. He said he pairs IPAs with everything because that's all he drinks. For me, when I went through my period with IPAs, I was searching for the most bitter IPAs I could find. We're talking like 300 IBU, like in your face, citrus, in your face, pine. And I just got to a point where I couldn't do that anymore because whether I was pairing it with a hookah or cigar, my palate was just wrecked.
Mm-hmm.
And I just went away from IPAs and gravitated towards stouts for a while. But Tony brings up a good point. Y'all hipster on them IPAs. I think IPAs get an over exaggeration in the beer market. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I do think IPAs are kind of played out. Don't get me wrong. I love a good IPA. I think it goes a really good blend of things that can go with an IPA. But I completely agree. The U.S. market, especially when you're looking back, maybe even 5 years ago, every craft brewer was focused on IPAs. And the thing about that is that when you saturate the market like that, not only are you exposing people to maybe not product that's good enough, but you're also giving people this general sense of what to expect from an IPA. So when something different comes out that might actually have taken more time to, think and put together and brew itself, you're looking at less of a good time for those who haven't experienced it. I for one hated IPAs when I became 21, but they grow on you. They really do.
Well, if you look in the picture right now that Chris is showing, he's completely trolling us right now. And I can appreciate that a little bit, Chris, but I think there's like maybe one or two beers that I would actually drink there, which is the Woodchuck and the Alaskan.
Yeah, I was just looking at that. Going the far left and far right. I think that it's kind of one of the things you see these trends in the market kind of appear, and it happens in every market, where one product comes out, everyone wants to emulate it. And what happened next, the good thing is like a lot of places now were on stouts, right? Everyone had to have a stout. And looking at the local market, like I have 21 breweries in Tucson, and that conceptualizes to that's a lot of dang good places that you need to go to. But a lot of them only are known for maybe one or two beers. They're not known for their entire selection. And I think that's kind of what happens when you saturate a market like that. You're not working on, 10 or 11 different beers that all could thoroughly impress your guests and make them keep coming back to the same spot. You're rather giving them one or two good options and then kind of ruining it for the people who might want to try something like a Hefeweizen, or maybe even like I'm a sour guy. I always will be. And it's one of those things like we have one place in Tucson that does 9 different sours. And that's where you go for sours.
Bless. Sours are the most interesting beer, in my opinion. And it takes some time to get into them and really kind of dive into them and understand them. But kind of before I go into that, I'm going to tag Mr. Wetbeard over here in the chat. And he said he pairs Azure cigar with whiskey. And it's such a beautiful experience. I've actually done it myself, which is it's an awesome pairing. Tony said he's going to bring a Modelo to Florida, and I'm all good with that. But if you look in that picture right there, I got Boddington's Pub Ale. That was a bad decision. We were trying to see how fast we could chug 2 pints of beer.
That's a really bad beer to chug.
And then my wife decided to do something that I'm not going to explain on camera, and I spit my beer out of my mouth. So that's the story behind that picture. So, we've talked about hookah, we've talked about beer and how we pair those together. I sent Chris some pictures, whether he has it up or not, I don't know. But how important is the environment to you when it comes to beer? When you're just going out for a beer and you want to go to a brewery, where does that rank on your level of importance? Because this is a beer and hookah show after all.
I'd like to say maybe it really depends on the environment that I'm walking into. It has to be a comfortable environment. It has to be somewhere where, people can socialize. We have a place just down the road that I wish I could frequent more, and it's actually called Arizona Beer House. It's just around the corner from me, and that's basically they have trivia nights. They consistently have food trucks. They kind of make sure that it's a spot where you can chill and relax without actually, overstepping bounds into someone else's social group. That being said, you also see these actions where a lot of craft breweries in my town are having this downsized version of a craft brewery where maybe they only have room for 10 to 20 people at a time. And that kind of forces interaction, which is really good in a lot of aspects. I've met a lot of really cool, brewers, craft beer fans, and we intermingle because you look at the fact that the way that we interact with hookah is very similar to how we interact with beer. So hookah is traditionally a social environment. We might not be person to person hanging out in the same room, but we have hangs going. We're talking, we're chatting, we're being goofballs, things like that you might not expect. And beer kind of does the same thing. You have a centralized hobby that allows you to expand your viewpoints and also kind of teaches you at the same time. And I think that's some of the things that craft brewing actually taught me a lot more about when it comes to everything I'm interested in. I'm no longer just trying to do all the research myself. I'm actually trying to go out and talk to people and kind of learn more about what I need to do to improve my game with that hobby.
Right, most definitely. And, Raul brought up the GOAT of all pale ale and IPAs in this chat, and I'm surprised. Pliny the Elder and Pliny the Younger out of Northern California is by far my favorite pale ale. It's just so clean. And when you taste a clean craft beer and you're not getting that overtone of rice or overtone of corn syrup or whatever that is. And it brings me back to kind of a good point. I lived in California, and about every 10 or 15 miles there was a craft brewery.
Mm-hmm.
Lived in Northern California. There was everything from Lagunitas to Sierra Nevada to the place, I can't remember where it is right now or what it is off the top of my head, but it's where Pliny the Elder is brewed, in Supplication and Degradation and a lot of those other different sours. But this kind of brings me back to, okay, these are what I really like, but what is your guilty pleasure beer? Like, you don't really want to tell anybody, but you kind of like, oh yeah, this is good. This reminds me of like 5 or 10 years ago.
It's still actually a craft brewing. It's actually still Colorado. If we're looking at probably that aspect, I actually have to say Odell. They're a larger size. I like to call them macro brewers, essentially, where their distribution can be throughout the entire country, but they're still small enough to where your everyday, casual beer drinker might not know about them. And it's got to be the Odell IPA. I've been hunting for years to get the tap handles. No one will give them to me. And if you don't know that beer, it is a India style pale ale, very clean, very filtered. It's like a 7.1 in APV, good bitterness ratio to it. Goes well with everything, especially if you're a wing fan. And it's one of those things where if I see a list and that is on there and nothing else appeases me, I'm not going to go anywhere near anything else on that list. It's kind of that default choice, if you will, of when I have the opportunity to drink, I'm going to drink that.
Yes, Chris found this beer somehow, and this is a beautiful, beautiful iteration of that style of beer. It is literally the cleanest beer I've ever drank in my life. My guilty pleasure is, I grew up in the Central Valley, so there's a lot of taquerias, there's a lot of taco trucks, and all kinds of different stuff. So my favorite is just a plain old Pacifico with a lime and a shrimp in it, because that just brings me back to when I was like 16. I'd go to the taco truck and you ask kind of, hey, what's behind there? And I really want one of those kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just kidding. Don't drink underage. Wait till you're 21. I appreciate it. It was more of a joke, but yes, that is my guilty pleasure. Pleasure is the Pacifico with the lime and lemon and the shrimp in it. It's just an amazing summer beer. I mean, you could be out, cruising around in the summer, pull over at your favorite taco stand, and they would always have that. Guys, in the chat, if you would just put kind of like your favorite beers in there, maybe we can pull some information from those. Um, Jack Casamanian says milk stout is his favorite. I actually have a chocolate milk stout now that I will be pairing on a future episode with something. And Paul Silo said he had this Jeremiah Red from BJ's and it was really good.
The Jeremiah Red's actually, I got to interrupt you there. That's a solid red ale if you're looking for something that's going to be available throughout the entire country.
And for those of you that are fans of the Little Irishman, Killiman's Irish Red.
Mm-hmm.
It's a cheap beer, but it is very, very good.
Let's actually also address another thing. Stefan actually just commented a minute ago about the green hookah in the background, and I know we've been kind of sitting on this for a little bit with our setup today. So if you want to throw that on, sir, we can talk about just a couple more of these stems for a brief second. Essentially, though, we're looking at the green guy right here. It's actually paired nicely on my Sahara vase right now. And that's actually going to be called the Flex. That design is actually nearly completed. We're actually working on a couple little tweaks to it, and that should be the first one I actually kind of launch. The color profiles that we're going to be offering are going to be these bright colors that you see on the sides here, paired with black predominantly. Now, there's also another one that my business partner, Kurt's been working on, and now that's the... We kind of call it the Corinthian column, if you will. I'm not sure if I know the architectural principles as well as he does. And that's actually going to be, for now, his own little personal pipe that he's been working on, if Chris wants to throw that on. And it kind of shows the limitations of what we can do compared to what a CNC could. Now, a CNC is capable of doing this, and it's capable of doing it really nicely, but the cost added to get those smaller details is so ludicrously high that when this stem comes out, when we release it, that is, you're looking at a cost difference of hundreds of dollars. Now, this one is the predicate that we try to go with is the idea for Spire is that I want to be able to give you a pipe that is aesthetically pleasing, that you can take to a party that someone can ask about, but it's not going to rob you of, $300 to $400 and end up being like a closet junkie hookah where you only use it maybe once a month when you're trying to like get a little bit of a satiated feel.
Right. With all my pipes, I use them a lot. I beat the crap out of them. I use them like literally at least once a week. I go through a pipe. Mm-hmm. So everything's always constantly in my rotation. What are some of the pipes that are not yours that you prefer?
So being 100% honest, and this is just things that I had to learn from my own expenditures, I am not a fan of anything that uses copper traditionally, more so for the reason of the cleaning aspects to it. I do appreciate the way that it smokes. I appreciate everything like that. But copper itself is a nightmare to freaking clean. I have spent hours upon hours trying to clean my Greyjoy, and my Greyjoy just will not ever be the same as it was when I first got it. Another one is a lot of the times, Jeremy, you and I have talked about stuff with anodization. More and more recently, I look at the idea with anodization as kind of a negative. I don't want an anodized pipe because it's just not going to be, it's not going to be the same pipe I got 2 years later. Now, I do smoke quite often. I smoke my Prometheuses. I have my Gen 1 Prometheus. It's like, I think, number 7 or something out of the first 25 made. I smoke it all the time. I also have an unanodized prototype of the Demi that came out with its original being the very first Demi that came out. And as much as I love that stem, because it isn't anodized, I don't touch it nearly as often as I'd like. The cleaning process for aluminum is a lot worse than it is for copper. You don't have a strong enough acid to remove that bauxite that kind of surrounds itself. And you see a lot of the times with that pipe, as much as it rips, as much as it smokes, it's aesthetically pleasing. It's one of those things where it degrades. Anodizing will always degrade on a pipe with threading. And unfortunately, that's exactly what happens with a lot of the pipes you see today that are these modular designs.
So for us non-tech material savvy folks, what is bauxite?
So bauxite is the actual original name for what aluminum is. If you look at it, bauxite is the elemental name towards basically what aluminum is. It's traditionally, I believe, a German name. The concept is, if you ever look at like an anodized pipe and you see that white chalky consistency that's coming around the bottom of the heart is probably the most predominant area. That is bauxite. And that is the natural corrosion abilities of what aluminum does. Aluminum is non-corrosive when it is surrounded inside bauxite. The same goes for copper. When you see that patina that comes through, copper doesn't erode as long as it is sealed in that patina.
So I got an old beer drinking buddy in the chat. His name is Michael Wells. I invited him to Hookah University and really got him kind of started and pushed into the hookah world. He was an old cigar buddy of mine. Michael, you know how much we drink when we drink. And what has been your favorite pairing, if you don't mind dropping that into the chat, and that maybe I can bring up some old memories. And Mr. Gugliesco has joined. We got a bunch of people in the chat. Everyone from Tony still here, Eddie. Thank you guys for sticking around. I really appreciate it. The Brack Daddy himself is back. And Bracken has also drank with me late at night, smoking hookah. So if you would drop your favorite pairings in there, let's see if we can recreate them on the show. And hopefully you guys have enjoyed so far. I'd like, just towards the end of the show to go into kind of some other things as well. What are the biggest concerns for you when you say, okay, I'm going to put this hookah together for some company that's coming over, and I also have some drinks. What is your biggest concern when you're looking to new people to introduce them to either hookah or craft beer?
I think that there's a lot of really good companies. Let's start with the hookah side first. I mean, we're all hookah heads. We all know those blends that we kind of stick to, especially if it's a newer smoker. A lot of the times, those really simple fruit blends kind of go really well for those that might not experience it. If I had someone that was more of a traditional smoker come over who actually has a little bit of a repertoire with it, I might do something a little bit more on the intense side. But a lot of the times, like you look at, like, I'm smoking Trifecta, and it'd be a shame not to send you anything about them. But Trifecta blondes are really good for starting you out, where you get these depths of flavor without it being too much. The same can be said for like Alpha Camo. You're also looking at things like, I don't have too much experience with it, but Azure is actually super plentiful in those ideas where it can still be a newer smoker's, paradise, if you will, where all these flavors come at you without you being overwhelmed while still enjoying your session. Now, looking on the beer side of things, beer gets a little bit more difficult because with hookah, people can kind of pick up on the taste and they can kind of figure out what they're going for. Beer is a different style in general because conceptually, we all kind of have an idea of a good beer, of what we expect out of a beer. And a lot of the times when we're looking at, say, I don't know, like if I have a group of people come over, I'm not going to hand them a stout. It's just not going to happen. I'm not going to hand them, anything that's going to be super craft etiquette unless I can kind of pick up on them being okay with it. So, a nice pale ale, a nice lager, maybe even something a little bit more German style traditional, like a Hefeweizen goes a long way. Because those are kind of palate neutral in the sense that you can see a little bit of flavor hit the palate, but nothing that's going to be either drop dead bitter or drop dead malty to the point where you can't enjoy what you're drinking or smoking.
Okay, so as your session progresses, and for me, when a beer starts warming up, I start noticing, when it's cold, you don't get as many notes, but as it starts to warm up in your glass, the citrus notes are pulling forward right now for me in this citrusy hazy pale ale. You're drinking a sour, which in my experience in the past, as the beer warms, it's going to get more and more sour forward. Mm-hmm. So how is that reacting right now for you with the Earl Grey?
Really nicely, actually. The Earl Grey, one of the things I like to do with pairings, no matter what it is, whatever I'm drinking, I like the concept of really kind of strong notes coming through from what I'm enjoying. So like I might have a really nice bourbon barrel aged whiskey with not bourbon barrel, but say like a Cabernet based whiskey. I've had a couple, and then you have a nice pipe going with you, or even like a nice steak. I'm going to make sure that the contrast between them is well enough that when I'm smoking, I know what I'm smoking, but when I'm drinking, I know what I'm drinking. And the sour notes that come through with this still linger on the palate, which is nice. You actually get this tingle on your tongue, if you will. But whenever I'm hitting the hookah itself, that note goes away entirely. And it's one of those aspects where it kind of, they always, my goal for a good beer, especially when I'm smoking, is that it's one kind of always leads into the next. You're not looking at the idea that, I'm drinking a super bitter IPA, and then as soon as I go and hit the hookah, those bitter notes just cut straight through the hookah. I want something where the hookah can substantiate well enough that I know exactly what is in that bowl the entire time. And that's one of the things I like to look at. I'm a big fan of stuff like vinegars when I'm enjoying food, and the harsher on the palate whenever I'm pairing it, the better, in my opinion. I like to kind of murder my tongue, if you will. We lost you again, Jeremy.
Christina brings up a good point, the Duchess, regarding being a very, very good beer. I've had it before. I don't remember what it was. If I remember, it's a citrus IPA.
No, I'm sorry. I'm going to cut you short, my friend. The Duchess of Bourgogne is from Founders, and that is arguably one of my favorite beers, period. Now, that's a Flanders style red ale, and it's similar to basically what I'm drinking here, but you're going to pick up on a little bit less of these, how should I say, malty notes that come from a darker beer. A Flanders red ale in general traditionally are always these super sour, in-your-face beers that just they just are not afraid to fuck with you. And a good point with that is, like, I found that beer once on a keg draft system. I have not found it again, and it was considered like a rocket keg, if you will, or what they like to call even a watermelon keg, where they only have enough for about 15 to 20 pints, and then they're done. They don't get that. You're only allowed limited allocation, and we're talking a beer that's like, $7 or $8 if you can find it. I know Whole Foods has it. I know a couple other places. It's one of those beers where if you're trying to go into the world of sours and you want to see a complex, deep, amazing sour, that is what you go to.
So for those of you that can get it, there is a brewery based in Southern California, and they also have a tap room in Washington, D.C. It's called The Brewery, B-R-U-E-R-Y. I don't remember the exact spelling. It's named after the founder. His last name is Rue, R-U-E. And they do a lot of sours and experimental beers. And they actually had a faux-inspired stout, which was really, really interesting. You're picking up some of the beefy and hardiness notes, but then it's sour after being barrel-aged. What is the most interesting beer that you've ever tried, and the most expensive beer you've ever tried?
Interesting is not necessarily good with my regard.
No, it's not.
So peatiness is a concept that needs to be addressed before I go into this beer, and I'm having little issues here, so my apologies. Get ready for the second bottle. So peatiness is a concept with Scotch and whiskey that comes out as a smoky flavor. And now, a lot of the times that smoky flavor can be overwhelming. A good example, comparing it directly to hookah, is someone throws 3 sets of coal, or 3 cubes on the third set of coals, and all they're picking up is that straight ash taste. Now, with that, and thinking about that, and thinking of that campfire that you get, right? I had locally available, it's a beer called Scout, and that is a mesquite smoked barrel aged porter that was probably, I think, like $11 or $12 for a pint. And to me, it was probably the most disgusting beer I have ever had. And it was one of those things where someone got it for me and they thought I'd like it. They didn't know what they were ordering. And I took one sip, and it literally was like someone had put a lit coal on my mouth. It was bad. It was that bad. It was nightmarish. And the thing is, I couldn't be rude. I couldn't be negative about it. So I took the beer, one gulp all the way down, chugged the entire pint, went and ran my tongue underwater for like 10 minutes, and then just got another beer and tried moving on. It is one of those things, man. There are beers out there, and it was like I was saying earlier, that their demographic is so small that you can't always imagine everyone drinking them. With regard to most expensive beer, I kind of actually do the same viewpoint that I have with wine. I've had some really expensive wines. I've had things like that when I was involved in management and properties and things like that. But a lot of the times with beer, I kind of cap myself. And the thing is, like, I can go with the idea that I can go buy, two $10 bottles of beer, or I can go and buy 120. And the concept to me with that is that, like, I think about my session here is like, my beer might not last the entire session if I'm drinking aggressively, but at the same time, I'm going to thoroughly enjoy, packing another bowl, anticipating this amazing new beer that I'm going to try after this first one I've gotten. So I say, like, if you're looking pure cost, I'd say it'd probably go to Odell's Brune Sour. Kind of hard to find really good beer. It was $25 for 750 ml, which is 23.6 ounces. And it was one of those ones where availability is like, no matter where you're at, you're looking like an $18 to $20 beer. But it's one of those beers I could sit down and sip with a friend and enjoy and have a really good conversation.
So while we're wrapping up here real quick, the most interesting beer for me was a chili infused beer by Rogue. It was Rogue Sriracha hot sauce beer. It was a 5.7 ABV out of Oregon. And talk about bringing the heat to a relaxing session. So think about, drinking all of these nice IPAs throughout the day. And then your buddy goes to the fridge, like towards the end of the night after you've had plenty of alcohol and you don't need any more, and bringing out this chili beer that's just going to, like, take this thing to a whole new level. Talk about hot, spicy, but cold on the palate. The most expensive beer I've ever tried, I still have one. They ran me about $300 a bottle when they were released, and that is Tactical Nuclear Penguin.
I think you mentioned that last night.
Yes. And then I also have the matching beer that is called Sink the Bismarck. These are beers that have been modified for super high ABVs. We're talking ABVs over 40 and 50%. Like, it's basically liquor at that point, but they still call it a beer. It's basically a barley wine. Paul Cielo drops a good point. Do you find yourself gravitating towards Belgian-style beers? Do you like Belgian-style beers?
So with my climate, yes. If those who haven't been to Tucson, but maybe have been to places like Vegas, summers get hot. But summer starts in like March and lasts until October. And one of the cool concepts with it is that, like, a really nice Saison, a really nice Tripel, when it starts bringing that heat, is amazing. It goes such a long way. I mentioned a quad in the chat a second ago. If you get a nice Belgian-style quad, you're ready, you have an entire day off, go for it. A quad will hit you in the face, but it's going to be super refreshing and relaxing as you do it.
Yeah, most definitely. When I think of Belgian, I go back to one of the first Belgians that I really got into, which was Golden Drac 9000, the Brewmasters edition. It's under $20. A lot of times during the summer, you can find it at any Bevmo, Friar Tuck, any real big wine and spirit store you'll be able to find. But it is a fantastic beer. It's a Belgian quad, but it also has vanilla notes. It is kind of high on the ABV side as far as a beer goes. It's like 12.5 to 13. But once you get into the craft beer world, you realize that 12.5 to 13 isn't a big deal. When you start looking at ABVs at like 21.5 or 22 or 23. So do you have any closing notes, David?
I just want to say thanks again for having me. Jeremy's a good guy if you guys don't know him. It's actually funny, the slight little story before I do those closing notes. Jeremy's first introduction to me was walking up to me in Oasis. I'm talking to you, Jack. You were there. And basically telling me, you better not be using toxic plastics in your 3D printing. And my very first response to him is like, now why on earth would I try to kill someone?
And then we became friends.
Exactly.
And he gave me this hat.
Closing notes. I think that I'm super excited. Maybe I'll be on here again. Maybe it'll be more of a full-time thing. That'd be really cool with me. But I think that if we're looking at beer in general and we're looking at hookah in general, a lot of it can be said very simply. Don't be afraid to experiment. If you find something you don't like, don't do it again. At the same time, if you're going to maybe you're set on a really nice beer with a really nice bowl, talk to someone who might know a little bit more. Maybe they don't. Maybe they're someone like our Canadian dude in the chat who basically they know the palate of what things pair nicely, and then you can kind of experiment from there. A lot of the driving force to beer is always going to be experimentation. Now, you might lose a couple of bucks in the process, but at the same time, you're going to experiment and you're going to find that one beer that you're hooked on, and every time you see it, you're going to be after it.
Well, my closing note is a little beer tip of the day. If you have a beer and it's nice and cold and it's, sticking to the napkin on the table, do what the old guys across from you are doing. Just put a little bit of salt on that napkin and put your beer on top of it. It will never stick.
Exactly.
So another closing note is shower beers are definitely better than shower hookahs. And, I agree with you, but I think we can work around that a little bit, Bracken. We could put the hookah on the outside of the shower and just create you like a 15-foot long hose.
No, because then you're missing out on the sauna effect from the coals.
Amazing. Well, I appreciate you guys for joining us for tonight. I know that Chris has to work at 4 a.m. in the morning, so I won't keep him too much longer. I appreciate him for producing this. He is the Jerry Bruckheimer of the hookah world. So if you don't follow him on Instagram, Twitch, Twitter, all those other social tags, just give him a follow. You like playing video games, follow him on Twitch. Support the guy who supports the community, And speaking of that, I got this lovely pack mats right here to pack another bowl. So thank you.
I got one more shout out too, if that's real quick.
And David, send it off with your boy.
All right. So first of all, as you said, Dr. Noob Sauce, you guys have to follow him on everything. That being said, though, I do want to shout out Elder Hookah Lounge. If you guys haven't heard of them, they are actually going to be opening up February 16th for a grand opening in Tucson, Arizona. Make it out if you can. If you don't, I understand. They provided me with both shishas today. Definitely good options. And then finally, we need to kind of address the big thank you to Jeremy for bringing me out here once again. Don't forget the guy with the beard. Definitely knows what he's talking about. It doesn't matter the scope of what you're looking at. He knows way more than I think you would think.
No. But you can still reach out to me and I'll ask David the real question.
All right. Well, until next time, guys, thank you again for joining us. It was a pleasure to be here. You all have a wonderful night. Check us out later. We might do some evening hangs. If you have any other questions, just let us know.
All righty. Thank you, guys. Take care.